Enough, stop putting on this pathetic act. My dad's voice thundered through the phone, as sharp as shrapnel ripping through the night. Your sister told us everything. About you deserting the military. About your partying and disgraceful behavior. Don't you ever call this house again until you've learned some shame and come home to confess. You've brought nothing but disgrace to this family. As of this moment, I no longer have a daughter named Angela. The line went dead. I sank onto the cold tile floor of the hospital, nearly 3,000 miles from home. My phone screen displayed the call duration. 32 seconds. That was all the time my own parents needed to convict me and strip me of the right to be their daughter, based on one vicious lie told by my older sister. At that exact moment, the steady beeping of the heart monitor behind me dissolved into one long, unbroken tone. Chloe. My battlefield sister, the woman I had obtained special military leave to stay beside during the final days of her battle with terminal cancer, had just taken her last breath. That night, I lost the only family I had left in the trenches and was ambushed from behind by my own flesh and blood. Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really want to know the ending of this story. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. When I was in 8th grade, I learned exactly what my worth was. I sat at the heavy oak dining table in our Hartford home, turning a silver second-place ribbon over in my fingers. The State Science Fair. I had beaten out 214 students from across Connecticut. I laid the ribbon flat next to my dinner plate, smoothing the wrinkled edges, and looked up at my father. He was buried behind his newspaper. He reached for his black coffee without lowering the page, took a slow sip, and muttered, "Good job, Angie." He never touched the ribbon. He never even looked at it. He set his mug down, flipped to the sports section, and kept reading. Across the table, my older sister watched the entire thing from behind her glass of water. Her lips pressed together into a thin, satisfied line. She picked up her fork and went back to eating, her posture a little taller, her chin a little higher. She had just watched my father dismiss me, and it fed her. That exact same weekend, both my parents sat in the absolute front row for my sister's high school drama club performance. They bought her 24 roses. My mother took 6 photographs. My father clapped so hard his palms were pink when they got home. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my chemistry homework when they walked in, laughing, still buzzing from the show. My father tossed his jacket over the back of the chair and started telling me how incredible my sister was on stage, how she owned the spotlight, how the audience gave her a standing ovation. I stared at the silver ribbon still sitting on the counter where I had left it 2 days ago. Nobody had moved it. Nobody had picked it up. Nobody had asked me a single question about it. In my family, obedience and public optics were the only currency that mattered. My sister delivered both flawlessly. I had neither. I pushed the silver ribbon into my pocket, finished my roast beef in silence, and walked away. I stopped seeking their applause that very night. That pattern never changed. Every birthday, every report card, every track meet the script repeated itself like a broken record embedded in the walls of that house. My mother baked a 3-layer cake for my sister's 16th birthday and invited 30 guests. For mine, she left a store-bought card on the kitchen counter with a $20 bill inside and forgot to sign it. My father drove my sister to every drama club rehearsal for 4 straight years, sitting in the parking lot reading his newspaper until she was done. When I won a regional biology competition and needed a ride to the awards ceremony 40 minutes away, he told me to take the bus. I took the bus. I sat in the back row holding my certificate in a plastic sleeve, watching the streetlights pass through the dirty window. I was 15 years old and I already understood the math. My sister was the investment. I was the overhead cost. I replaced my need for their love with a need for extreme discipline. I buried myself in biology textbooks and physical training. I ran 3 miles every morning before school. I dissected frogs in the garage. I memorized every bone in the human body while my sister memorized her lines for the next school play. The dynamic of the entire household shifted the day the mail arrived during my senior year. I walked into the kitchen and dropped a thick, heavy envelope onto the granite counter. It bore the official seal of the Uniformed Services University. My father stopped chewing his food. He picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the official government cardstock between his rough fingers. He turned it over, slowly reading the return address twice. Then he looked at me. His eyes finally registered my physical existence for the first time in 18 years. "Maybe you'll finally become a real soldier, Angie," he said, his voice carrying a strange foreign weight of respect. He set the envelope down carefully, almost reverently, as though it might shatter if he gripped it too hard. My mother immediately grabbed the landline phone. She started calling the neighbors, bragging loudly about her military daughter. She paced around the kitchen with the cord stretched tight, reciting the name of the university 3 times to make sure Mrs. Patterson next door heard it correctly. But I did not look at my parents. I looked across the table at my sister. She was smiling. It was a tight, mathematically calculated smile that stopped entirely at her lower lip. Her eyes were dead and cold, 2 dark stones sitting in a face made of porcelain. My step into the light had just triggered her ultimate survival instinct. By putting on a uniform, I had become an active threat to her monopoly on our parents' pride. She placed her fork down with a sharp clack against the china plate. She folded her napkin. She excused herself from the table without finishing her meal. I heard her bedroom door close with a soft, deliberate click. That click was the first shot fired. Over the next week, my sister executed her first tactical maneuver. She bombarded me with sweet, overly enthusiastic phone calls. She sat on my bed cross-legged, hugging my pillow, and asked for my training schedule. She brought me a coffee from the kitchen and asked for my commanding officers' names. She borrowed my laptop to look up the base location and asked for the address of my barracks. She wrote everything down in a small pink notebook, smiling the whole time. I gave her every single detail, stupidly assuming she finally cared about her little sister. I handed her the exact intelligence she needed to execute my character assassination. I packed my military duffel bag, hugged her goodbye at the front door, and left for basic training, entirely unaware I had just armed my executioner. My 3rd year in the military, my world collapsed from the inside. My roommate and battle buddy, Private First Class Chloe Jenkins, started coughing up blood during a morning run. She bent over at the knees on the gravel track, her hands planted on the ground, a bright red stain spreading across the dirt beneath her face. The military doctors delivered the verdict within 72 hours. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Terminal. Chloe was a ward of the state. She had no parents, no siblings, no emergency contact on file except mine. She only had me. I immediately submitted a formal request to my commanding officer for compassionate leave. The base commander reviewed it, stamped it, signed it, and approved it legally, keeping my rank and position entirely secure. I moved my duffel bag into Chloe's off-base apartment. I drove her to chemotherapy 3 times a week. I held a cold washcloth to her forehead at 3 a.m. when the pain tore through her chest, and she screamed into a pillow so the neighbors would not call the police. I spent every waking hour in that apartment or at the hospital. I learned how to change a chemo port. I learned how to flush a PICC line with saline at 2 in the morning without turning on the lights so Chloe could sleep. I washed her hair in the bathtub when she was too weak to stand, holding her neck with one hand and rinsing with the other. The military taught me to save lives on the battlefield. Nobody taught me how to watch a friend die 1 centimeter at a time in a rented apartment with thin walls and a leaking kitchen faucet. I needed someone to collect and hide my civilian mail back in Hartford so my parents would not worry. I called my sister. I sat on the edge of Chloe's bed, watching the IV drip feed chemicals into her veins, and explained the situation in rapid, desperate sentences. Chloe was dying. I was on approved leave. I needed help. My sister listened. I could hear her breathing through the receiver, slow and measured, like a predator deciding when to bite. Then her voice poured through the phone, dripping with honey and fake empathy. "Oh God, Angie, I'm so sorry. You just rest. I won't say a word to Mom and Dad." I let out a massive breath of relief. My shoulders dropped 3 inches. I thanked her twice. I told her I loved her. She said it back. Her voice was warm, convincing, perfectly performed. The actress had always been better than the soldier at hiding her true face. 3 days later, I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor next to Chloe's hospital bed. The IV chemo pump beeped in a steady rhythmic pattern beside my ear, marking every second of a life running out of seconds. It was exactly 11 p.m. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of the medical equipment. My cell phone lit up on the floor beside my knee. The caller ID said Dad. I picked it up exhausted, rubbing the grit from my eyes with the back of my free hand. Dad, hey, what's... His voice cut through the line like a blade dropped from a height, killing every trace of warmth in the room. Your sister told me everything. I sat up straight, my spine slamming against the wall behind me. My heart pounded against my ribs. Dad, wait, what are you talking about? He did not pause. He did not take a breath. About you deserting, about your drug addict boyfriend, everything. I stared at the IV chemo bag dripping fluid into Chloe's skeletal arm. My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Dad, no. I am on approved military leave. I am at the hospital taking care of a soldier who is dying. I can give you my commander's direct number right now. The line crackled with static. Then my mother's hysterical voice shrieked over the speakerphone, shrill enough to rattle the receiver against my ear. How dare you smear this family, Angela? I stood up. My legs shook. My voice trembled with pure panic as I pressed the phone against my face. Listen to the facts. I have the military paperwork right here. I can scan it and email it to you in 30 seconds. My father roared into the receiver, his voice so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Enough. Don't call this house until you're ready to confess. You've humiliated this family enough. Scum! The line went dead with a sharp click that echoed in the dark room like a gunshot. I dropped the phone to the linoleum floor. It bounced once and landed face up. The call log glowed in the darkness, displaying the duration. 32 seconds. That was all the time it took to completely erase 21 years of my life. My father had not asked for the commander's number. My mother had not asked for the paperwork. They had not paused for 1 second to consider that their youngest daughter might be telling the truth. They had convicted me without a single piece of evidence, without a single attempt at verification, because my sister had already written the verdict for them and they signed it without reading the case file. I sat on the linoleum floor in the dark. The IV pump beeped beside me. Chloe shifted in her sleep, a thin moan escaping her cracked lips. I pressed the heels of my palms into my eyes until I saw white sparks behind my eyelids. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone against the wall. I pressed my lips together, swallowed the bile rising in my throat, and counted my breaths the way my drill sergeant taught me. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 4. I counted 12 full cycles before my hands stopped shaking. 10 minutes later, my phone chimed. A text message illuminated the cracked screen. It was from my sister. I'm sorry, Angie, I had to tell them. She attached a single red broken heart emoji. 3 sentences and a cartoon heart. That was the detonation summary for the precision airstrike she had just dropped on my entire life. I read the text 3 times. My jaw locked. I looked over at Chloe, who was asleep, her chest rising and falling in shallow, labored movements beneath the thin hospital blanket. I turned the phone off. I placed it face down on the cold floor. I turned my back on my bloodline and went back to the dying soldier who actually needed me. I pulled the blanket higher over Chloe's shoulders, sat down against the wall, and did not close my eyes for the rest of the night. For 5 agonizing days, I fought a desperate one-sided war from the trenches of Chloe's living room. I dialed my parents' landline 14 times. The first 3 calls my father picked up and hung up before I could finish a sentence. By the 4th call, the line simply clicked into a rapid, busy signal. They had contacted the phone company to block my number. I sat at my laptop on the kitchen counter, the screen reflecting the dark circles under my eyes, and typed out 2 massive emails. I attached the official PDF files of my military leave orders stamped and signed by the base commander, along with a photograph of me in full uniform standing outside the military hospital. 0 response. No reply. No acknowledgement. The emails might as well have been dropped into a black hole. I called my Aunt Martha, my father's older sister, begging her to drive over to Hartford and show them the documents in person. I paced the apartment while the phone rang, chewing the skin off my bottom lip. 40 minutes later, Martha called me back. Her voice was heavy with defeat, and I could hear her setting her keys down on a table with a tired clank. He told me to stay out of it. He said, "She disgraced the uniform, she can suffer the consequences." Martha apologized. She told me she tried. She told me my father had physically closed the front door in her face while she was mid-sentence. I thanked her, hung up, and sat down on Chloe's kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator. On the 6th day, I handwrote a letter, 4 pages front and back in my neatest handwriting. I sealed it in a white envelope, wrote my parents' address in black ink, and mailed it from the base post office. A week later, it came back in my mailbox. A heavy red stamp was smeared across the front in blocky capital letters. Returned to sender, unopened. I held the envelope up to the light. The seal was intact. They had not even bothered to tear the corner. That exact same Sunday, Chloe's heart monitor went completely flat. The long, piercing tone filled the room like a scream that never ended. The nurses came in, turned off the machines one by one, and pulled the white sheet over her face. I stood alone in the base chapel for her funeral. I was the only person sitting in the pews wearing my Class A dress uniform, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. The chaplain read a passage to an empty room. The air was freezing. I did not shed a single tear. When I returned to our apartment to pack her belongings into cardboard boxes, I found a yellow sticky note stuck to my desk lamp. I recognized her messy left-handed writing instantly. The ink was smudged where her palm had dragged across the wet letters. "Finish the mission, Angela. Become the medical officer I know you will be. Never let your bloodline dictate who you are." I peeled the note off the lamp, carefully folded it once, and placed it in my breast pocket right over my heart. I stopped crying forever. I folded grief into a tight square and locked it in a box I would never open again. I turned myself into a machine. I returned to active duty, took on massive student debt, and worked endless, brutal night shifts. The military does not care if your family disowned you. A 12-hour trauma shift does not get shorter just because you spent your lunch break hyperventilating in the ammo supply room, gripping the edges of a metal shelf until the shaking stopped. I shut down my emotions the way a surgeon clamps off a bleeding artery. Fast, clean, absolute. I studied until my eyes burned and the textbook print blurred into gray shapes on the page. I operated until my hands cramped so badly I had to pry my fingers open with my other hand under the scrub sink. I ate meals standing up, shoveling cold food into my mouth between shifts, because sitting down felt like wasting time. I slept 4 hours a night, sometimes 3, my alarm set to a volume that could wake the dead. On the nights I could not sleep at all, I went to the base gym and ran on the treadmill until my legs gave out. Then I walked home in the dark and started studying again. I graduated at the top of my class. I was commissioned as an officer, and I secured an elite surgical residency at the Fort Vanguard Trauma Center. On the night I received my acceptance letter, I sat alone in my quarters, holding Chloe's yellow sticky note in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. I read her words one more time, folded the note, and put it back in my breast pocket. At Fort Vanguard, I built a new fortress from scratch. Major General Evelyn Hayes found me first. She was a woman with steel gray hair, cropped at the jawline, hands that had performed over 3,000 surgeries, and eyes that could spot a lie from across an operating room. She walked into the surgical bay on my first day, watched me suture a laceration without speaking, and nodded once when I finished. She became the mother I lost, guiding my hands in the operating room, correcting my posture during presentations, and telling me to eat when I forgot for 16 hours straight. Then I met Marcus. He was a JAG lawyer with deep, calm eyes and a voice that never rose above the volume of a normal conversation, no matter how heated the argument. We met in the base cafeteria. He sat down across from me, uninvited, noticed I was reading a medical journal while eating cold pasta, and asked me what I was studying. 6 months later, on a Saturday night, I sat on the edge of his couch in his off-base apartment and told him the entire story of my family. Every detail. The silver ribbon, the phone call, Chloe, the returned letter. I spoke for 45 minutes without stopping. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Marcus did not offer pity. He did not tilt his head or reach for my hand. He simply looked at me with those calm, steady eyes and said, You deserve better. 2 years later, we got married. There were exactly 30 guests in the chapel. Marcus's father, a retired colonel with a firm handshake and silver oak leaves on his dress uniform, offered his arm and walked me down the aisle. The wedding invitation I had mailed to Hartford was returned to my mailbox 3 days before the ceremony, completely unopened. The same red stamp smeared across the front, just like the letter 5 years ago. I fed it into the paper shredder without blinking and watched the white confetti disappear into the bin. 6 months ago, my husband Marcus sat me down at our kitchen island. He was still wearing his JAG uniform, the collar unbuttoned, his jaw tight. He placed his coffee mug on the granite counter with a heavy thud that told me this was not a casual conversation. He slid a printed manila folder toward me across the smooth surface, his index finger pressing down on the edge of the paper to keep it from sliding off. He had been reviewing historical-based security logs as part of a routine compliance audit. He looked me dead in the eye. Angela, 2 years ago, base HR/JAG received an anonymous call asking about your disciplinary record. They wanted to know if you had ever been stripped of your rank or faced any charges. He tapped a line of text on the paper with the tip of his pen. The digital IP address of the caller originated from a suburban house in Hartford, Connecticut. I did not need to look up the address. I'd grown up in that house. I stared at the black ink on the paper. My blood ran cold. The realization landed on me like a collapsing building. My sister was not just lying to our parents to maintain her golden child status. She had executed a full-scale psychological operation against me. My Aunt Martha confirmed the scope of the damage 2 days later during a long phone call. Martha told me about the previous Thanksgiving, how my sister had sat at the head of the holiday table, dabbing the corner of her eye with a cloth napkin, performing grief, like a lead actress in a primetime drama. She told my grandmother, Nana June, that I had been court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. She told my Uncle Frank that I was homeless and living in a shelter somewhere on the West Coast. She told my cousin David that I had married a man with a criminal record. Martha's voice shook with fury as she recounted the details. Every single relative had swallowed the lies whole because my sister cried while she told them. And then, terrifyingly, she actually tried to use the United States military apparatus to make her lies a reality. She wanted to trigger an official investigation into my service record. She wanted my rank stripped. She wanted me completely destroyed so her lie would become the permanent truth and no one would ever question it. I closed the manila folder. I looked at Marcus. He looked back at me, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. I placed my palm flat on the counter and pressed down until the granite felt like it was pushing back. Marcus reached across the counter and placed his hand on top of mine. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The lawyer in him had already built the case. The soldier in me had already filed the intelligence. My sister had not made a mistake. She had not acted out of confusion or grief. She had executed a sustained 5-year multi-front psychological operation designed to permanently erase me from the family record and destroy my military career from the outside. She had tried to turn the United States government into her personal weapon. And when that failed, she doubled down on the family front, burying me deeper under layers of fabricated tragedy so thick that even Aunt Martha had struggled to dig through them. The sister I once hugged goodbye at the front door was not just a liar. She was an active combatant who had been waging war against me for half a decade while I was busy saving lives and earning rank. Marcus squeezed my hand once, firm and deliberate. I pulled my hand back, picked up the manila folder, and locked it in the fireproof safe in our bedroom closet. 6 months passed. The memory dissolved. I snapped back to the present. My trauma pager shrieked, vibrating violently against my hip. I bolted out of my desk chair, knocking over my half-empty coffee cup. The black liquid spread across the paperwork I had been reviewing. I did not stop to clean it. Level 1. Trauma. Car crash, female, 35 years old. Blunt abdominal trauma, unstable hemodynamics. ETA, 8 minutes. The alert text burned bright on the small screen. I pulled my long white coat over my tactical green scrub uniform, slammed my office door shut, and sprinted down the sterile hallway toward the emergency bay. My boots squeaked against the polished floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in a continuous flat tone. Two nurses fell in behind me as I rounded the corner, matching my pace without a word. I burst through the double doors of the nursing station. The charge nurse looked up from her monitor. I grabbed the glowing iPad from the desk and swiped down aggressively to load the incoming paramedic report. The screen filled with patient data. I stopped breathing. The muscles in my neck locked up. My grip on the iPad tightened until the rubber case bent inward under my thumb. The name glared back at me in harsh blue light against the white background. Patient Vanessa Morris. Date of birth, March 14th, 1990. Emergency contact, Robert Morris, father. Every alarm and voice in the busy emergency room suddenly vanished into a vacuum. The world went completely silent. I could hear my own pulse beating inside my skull. Sergeant Miller tapped my shoulder from behind, asking if I was okay. I handed her the tablet without turning around. My face was absolute stone. No expression. No reaction. I issued my orders in a voice that could have frozen water in a glass. Prepare Bay 2. Have Captain Ramirez scrub in and stand by. Miller took the tablet and moved immediately. The sirens wailed outside the ambulance bay doors, growing louder, bringing the ghosts of my past straight to my operating table. I stood at the scrub sink, the scalding water running over my hands, turning my skin bright pink under the harsh surgical lights. I dried each finger individually with a sterile towel, walked into operating room 2, and held my hands up in front of my chest palms facing forward. I looked directly at Captain Ramirez across the operating table. The body on the table was draped in blue sterile sheets. The anesthesiologist nodded from behind the ventilator. The heart monitors beeped in a steady mechanical rhythm. The military protocol for conflict of interest was absolute and non-negotiable. I spoke sharply, my voice projecting clearly over the beeping. Patient is family. If I lose focus, you take over. Ramirez locked eyes with me and nodded tightly. She positioned herself directly across from me, her gloved hands resting on the sterile drape, ready to take the scalpel from my grip the second my composure cracked. I held out my right hand. The surgical tech placed the scalpel into my palm with a metallic snap. For 3 hours and 40 minutes, I blocked out every memory. I blocked out the phone call. I blocked out the broken heart emoji. I blocked out the red stamp on the returned letter. I operated with absolute cold military discipline. I clamped the bleeders one by one, each hemostat clicking into place like the chambers of a revolver. I removed the ruptured spleen. I repaired the torn liver capsule with a running suture, my fingers moving in smooth, precise arcs. Ramirez watched me the entire time. She did not need to intervene, not once. At exactly 6:45 a.m., I placed the final suture. The knot was tight, clean, and centered. My sister was alive. Ramirez stepped back from the table and offered to go speak to the family in the waiting room. I stripped off my bloody latex gloves, peeled them inside out, and threw them in the biohazard bin. No, this case is mine. I walked down the long white hallway toward the surgical waiting room. My surgical clogs squeaked against the tile with each step. I could see my parents through the glass partition at the end of the corridor. They were sitting rigidly on the plastic chairs, their bodies stiff, their faces gray. My father was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. My mother was clutching a crumpled tissue in her fist. They looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen them, which was in a photograph on my Aunt Martha's phone 3 Christmases ago. I placed both hands on the heavy double doors and pushed them open. The hinges groaned. Both of my parents looked up at the same time. I reached for the zipper of my blood-stained surgical jacket. I grabbed the metal tab and pulled it down in one swift, deliberate motion, shedding the jacket from my shoulders and dropping it onto the back of the nearest chair. Underneath, my crisp-pressed military field uniform was perfectly intact. The gold oak leaf of an 04 Major gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. My black name tape was stitched in block letters across my chest. Major Angela Morris, Chief of Trauma Surgery. My father shot up from his plastic chair. The chair legs screeched against the tile floor. He stepped forward, his hand half raised. Officer, my daughter. He froze mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto the gold Major insignia on my chest. They stayed there for 2 full seconds. Then, slowly agonizingly, they tracked upward past the name tape, past the collar, and landed on my face. The shock hit him like a physical blow to the sternum. He staggered back a half step, his heel catching the leg of the chair behind him. A second later, my mother looked up from her crumpled tissue, gasped, and dug her fingernails into my father's arm so hard the fabric of his jacket bunched under her grip. I did not flinch. I kept my posture rigid, my boots shoulder-width apart, my hands clasped behind my back. My voice came out dead flat and professional, exactly the way I delivered post-operative briefings to families I had never met. Mr. and Mrs. Morris, I am Major Morris, Chief of Surgery. Your daughter Vanessa is past the critical stage. She is in the ICU. My mother lunged forward, sobbing my name, both arms reaching for my face. I took a hard, tactical half-step back, planting my rear foot firmly on the tile, refusing the physical contact. She stumbled and caught herself on the armrest of the nearest chair. My father's voice cracked like a dry branch. You're an officer! He stammered, his eyes darting between the insignia and my face as though his brain could not reconcile the two. I nodded once, a single controlled dip of my chin. My mother balled her hands, covering her entire face, her body folding forward at the waist. We thought you deserted. She said you were wandering the streets. I stared at them. My face was a mask of carved ice. Not a single muscle moved. None of that is true. My father desperately tried to regain his lost patriarchal authority. He straightened his back, puffed out his chest, and raised his voice the way he used to when I was a child, and he wanted the room to obey. This isn't the time for this. Your sister is in the ICU. I cut him off before the last syllable left his mouth, my voice cracking like a whip across the waiting room. I just spent 3 hours and 40 minutes making sure she didn't die. So yes, I know exactly where she is. My father's mouth opened. No sound came out. He took another half step back and collapsed into the plastic chair behind him. Right on cue, the double doors behind me swung open. Sergeant Miller marched in with her boots hitting the floor in perfect cadence, delivered a textbook salute, her right hand snapping to her brow, and dropped the final bomb in front of my devastated parents. Major General Hayes just called. The medical board officially announces that the major has been awarded the Medical Officer of the Year. I returned the salute flawlessly, my arm rising and falling in a single fluid motion. I looked at my parents. My mother was on her knees beside the plastic chair, sobbing into the seat cushion. My father was staring at me with his mouth open, tears rolling silently down his unshaven cheeks. I turned on my heel and walked away. If you know the glorious feeling of letting your massive success be the ultimate revenge against those who doubted you, hit the like button and share your story below. We read every single comment. I walked into the intensive care unit the next morning. The ventilator hissed in a rhythmic pattern beside my sister's bed, pushing air into her lungs with a mechanical sigh that sounded like a creature breathing in the dark. My sister was awake. Her eyes were glassy, bloodshot, and swollen from the anesthesia. The second I stepped through the glass door, her gaze darted straight to my uniform. Her pupils locked onto the gold major insignia on my collar like a targeting laser. The remaining color drained entirely from her face. Her skin turned the same shade of gray as the hospital sheets. She looked like she had seen a ghost, and in a way she had. The little sister she had buried under 5 years of lies was standing over her bed in a pressed military uniform, alive, decorated, and in command. Her voice came out sounding like crushed glass scraped across concrete. Angie, listen, I can explain. I leaned over the metal bed rails, planting both my hands on the cold steel bar. My face was completely devoid of empathy. I jerked my chin toward the glass door where our parents were standing in the hallway, trembling, clutching each other's arms, waiting for permission to enter the room I controlled. You don't need to explain to me. Explain to them. I stepped aside and pushed the glass door open with one hand. My parents rushed into the room like two people running from a burning building, only to find themselves in a worse fire. My sister instantly deployed her ultimate weapon. Tears. She sobbed violently, her chest heaving against the surgical bandages. She pointed a trembling finger at me, crying out that she did not know I was an officer. She said she had been confused. She said she thought the military had discharged me years ago. She said she was only trying to protect the family. The performance was flawless. It always was. But this time the audience was not buying tickets. My father stood at the foot of the bed. He did not rush to comfort her. He did not reach for her hand. He stood there shaking with a terrifying suppressed rage that turned his face a deep, mottled red. His fists hung at his sides, the knuckles bone white. She is a major. She is the chief of surgery. He bellowed, his voice bouncing off the ICU walls so hard the nurse at the station outside flinched. My mother shrieked, demanding to know about the 14 phone calls and the military letters I had sent 5 years ago. She grabbed my sister's arm and shook it. My sister panicked. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. She backed herself into the corner of the hospital bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin, pointing a shaking finger at me. She hated this family. She never even tried to call. My father's roar shook the heart monitors. The beeping pattern spiked erratically on the screen. Because you told us to block her number. At exactly 9:45 a.m. Aunt Martha marched into the ICU. She did not say hello. She did not pause in the doorway. She walked in like a one-woman military tribunal, her purse slung over her shoulder, her orthopedic shoes squeaking against the tile with each deliberate step. She pulled out her smartphone and shoved it directly into my parents' faces, the screen's glare reflecting off my father's glasses. She swiped aggressively through the evidence with her thumb, barely giving them time to process each image before moving to the next. Screenshots of my military leave orders stamped and signed by the base commander. My promotion photos in full dress uniform, standing at attention in front of the American flag. My graduation ceremony with General Hayes pinning the medical officer badge to my chest. And the killing blow. A text message my sister had sent Aunt Martha 4 years ago displayed in a blue bubble on the bright screen. The words were burned into the pixels. Don't tell Mom and Dad Angie is a military resident. It will confuse them. Martha held the phone 6 inches from my mother's face and let her read it 3 times. Then she turned her wrath on both my parents, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the small ICU room. And you two, you believed a liar simply because loving her was easier than verifying the truth. My mother collapsed into the vinyl chair beside the bed. The air left her body like a punctured tire. Aunt Martha reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She shoved it into my mother's lap. It was the final email I had sent 5 years ago, printed out on white paper, the text highlighted in yellow marker where Martha had underlined the key sentences. My mother unfolded it with shaking fingers. She read the words aloud, her voice cracking and choking on her own spit between every syllable. Mom, I got promoted. I am still your daughter. She doubled over in the chair, wailing in absolute agony, the paper crumpling against her chest as she pressed it to her body. Martha did not let up. She twisted the knife straight into my father's chest without blinking. You missed her wedding. Marcus's father walked her down the aisle. My father turned his back to the room. He leaned his forehead against the cold window glass, pressing both palms flat against the surface. His massive shoulders heaved. For the first time in 62 years, the patriarch cried. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, distorted and broken. He begged me to fix it. He turned around, his face wet, his voice cracked and stripped of every ounce of authority he had ever wielded. He said he would do anything. He said he was sorry. He said the words over and over like a man reciting a prayer he did not know how to finish. I stepped forward and raised my right hand in a sharp military halt. Palm out, fingers straight. He stopped talking immediately. I believe you are sorry, but sorry is just the starting line. I looked dead into his tear-streaked face, holding his gaze the way I held a scalpel, steady and without mercy. You must understand this. I am no longer the daughter you considered a disgrace. I built a life in the military without you. If you want to step into it, it will be on my terms. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed once. He nodded slowly, like a man signing a document he knew would change his life forever. 2 weeks after she was discharged from the hospital, I summoned my sister to a neutral coffee shop just outside the base gates. I chose the location deliberately. Neutral ground. No home advantage for either side. I arrived 20 minutes early, sat at a corner table with my spine straight and my back against the wall, wearing my green duty uniform. I ordered a black Americano and placed it on the table without drinking it. The steam rose in a thin curling line in front of my face. She arrived looking haggard. Her designer purse was clutched to her chest like a shield. Her hair was unwashed, pulled into a messy knot at the base of her skull. The dark circles under her eyes were deeper than the ones I had earned during my residency. She pulled the chair out, sat down, and immediately started scanning my face for a crack, a sign of softness, anything she could exploit. I did not offer to buy her a drink. I did not smile. I did not ask how she was feeling. I looked at her and asked one single word. Why? The syllable landed on the table between us like a grenade with the pin pulled. She held it together for approximately 4 seconds. Then the fake mask slipped off her face like wet plaster falling from a wall. Her chin trembled. Her lower lip folded inward. She looked at my uniform, at the gold oak leaf, at the name tape, at the surgical badge pinned above my breast pocket. Because you were about to become everything I couldn't be. She confessed to everything. The phone calls, the lies to our parents, the fake tears at Thanksgiving, the anonymous call to JAG. She admitted she tried to report my military orders as forged, but the military ignored her complaint because the documentation was ironclad. She sat in that coffee shop and dismantled 5 years of psychological warfare in 15 minutes, her voice getting quieter with each sentence until I had to lean forward to hear her. I did not react. I let her empty herself out like a canteen with a bullet hole in the bottom. I slid a yellow legal pad across the wooden table. The paper made a dry scraping sound against the surface. The military didn't protect me, Vanessa. They protected the truth. I laid out my ironclad terms. I spoke in short, clipped sentences the same way I delivered post-operative instructions. I told her I would not legally banish her. I told her I was not interested in revenge, but she had a massive debt to pay and the payment was non-negotiable. She was to write a full confession detailing every specific lie she told over the past 5 years and email it to all 47 members of our extended family, every aunt, every uncle, every cousin, every grandparent. You will correct every single story, I ordered, tapping the table with my index finger hard enough to rattle my untouched coffee cup. She stared at the wood grain of the table. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against the surface to stop the trembling. She nodded in total defeat, her chin dipping to her chest. The very next day I sat across from my parents in my official base office. The room was small and functional. A metal desk, 2 chairs on the opposite side. An American flag standing in the corner, a framed photo of General Hayes on the wall behind me. My parents sat in the 2 chairs like defendants in a courtroom, their bodies rigid, their eyes downcast. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a white business card. I placed it on the desk, slid it across the surface with 2 fingers, and watched my father pick it up. Therapy, both of you, twice a week. He immediately bristled. His old toxic pride flared up behind his eyes like a pilot light catching gas. He read the psychologist's name on the card, flipped it over, read the address on the back, and set it down on the desk with a dismissive tap. Our family doesn't do those things, Angie. I leaned over my desk, planting both my hands flat on the metal surface. My wedding ring clicked against the steel. My voice dropped an octave, cold and absolute, the same tone I used when a junior officer tried to cut corners in my operating room. That is exactly why we are sitting here, sir. The word sir landed like a slap. He was not my commanding officer. He was not the patriarch of my household. He was a man sitting in my office in my building, on my base, being told what to do by the daughter he threw away. He swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. He stared at his own shoes for 5 full seconds. Then he picked up the white business card, folded it once, and put it in his leather wallet without another word. My mother watched him do it. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, barely visible. I did not yell at them. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice above a conversational volume during the entire meeting. I treated them exactly like a failing platoon that needed severe restructuring. They were not my enemies. They were not villains in a story. They were 2 people who had made catastrophic decisions because they chose comfort over truth, And now they had to learn the hard way why they found it so incredibly easy to execute their own daughter without a trial. I stood up from my desk chair. I adjusted my uniform, pulling the hem of my jacket down with both hands, smoothing the fabric over my belt. The gesture was deliberate. It signaled that the meeting was officially over. My parents recognized the cue. They stood up quietly, pushing their chairs back with a soft scrape against the linoleum floor. My mother reached for my hand as she passed my desk. I let her squeeze my fingers for 2 seconds, then released. My father stopped at the door, turned back, and opened his mouth to say something. I held his gaze and shook my head once. Not now. He closed his mouth, nodded, and walked out of my office. They left the building together, walking down the long concrete corridor, finally understanding that they were no longer the commanders of my life. I was the one issuing the orders now. 3 days later, my cell phone vibrated on my desk during a paperwork session. I picked it up. A notification from my email. My sister had hit send. The confession email landed simultaneously in the inboxes of 47 relatives across the country. It contained 3 sharp, humiliating paragraphs admitting to 5 years of pathological lies and systematic manipulation. She named specific lies. She named specific dates. She named specific relatives she had deceived. She admitted to fabricating my desertion, my court-martial, my homelessness, and my supposed criminal husband. She admitted to calling JAG. She admitted to convincing our parents to block my phone number and return my letters unopened. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. My phone rang 10 minutes later. It was my grandmother, Nana June, her voice shaking with a fury I'd never heard from a woman in her 80s. She'd been played for a fool by her favorite grandchild, and the betrayal cut her deeper than any of us expected. She demanded to know why nobody had verified a single claim. She demanded to know why nobody had called the military directly. She hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next 48 hours, the extended family did not scream at my sister. They did not send angry texts. They did not organize a family meeting to shame her publicly. They simply stopped answering her calls. One by one, the green dots next to her name went dark. That deafening collective silence was a harsher punishment than anything I could ever inflict with my own hands. A month later, I stood on the brightly lit stage at the annual Military Medical Gala. The chandeliers above the ballroom cast a warm golden light across 300 officers in formal dress. I was wearing my dress blues, the dark navy fabric pressed to a razor edge, every button polished, every crease aligned. General Hayes stepped forward from behind the podium, holding a small velvet case. She opened it, lifted the Medical Officer of the Year medal, and pinned it to my chest with steady, practiced hands. The weight of the medal settled against my sternum, small but heavy. I stepped up to the podium and placed both hands on the wooden edges. I looked out into the massive crowd of officers and their families. I saw Marcus sitting in the front row, his JAG dress uniform perfect, his calm eyes locked on mine, a small proud smile on his lips. I saw Aunt Martha 2 seats over, dabbing a tear from the corner of her eye with a tissue she had been clutching since the ceremony started. And in the very back row, sitting entirely alone at a table near the exit, I saw my parents. They were sitting stiffly, their posture awkward and out of place among the uniformed guests. My father was wearing a sport coat he had clearly bought for the occasion, the tag still peeking from the inside collar. My mother was in a dark dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Their eyes held a complex mixture of immense pride and crushing grief, 2 emotions fighting for dominance on faces that had aged decades in a matter of months. I leaned into the microphone. The feedback hissed once, then settled into silence. The massive room went dead quiet. 300 people stopped breathing at the same time. I looked directly at Marcus and General Hayes. Family isn't necessarily those who share your blood. Sometimes family are the comrades who choose you. My mother covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook violently under the thin fabric of her dress. Marcus closed his eyes and nodded once, slow and deliberate. I paused. I let the heavy silence hang over the room for 5 full seconds. The chandelier light hummed. A glass clinked somewhere in the back. The echo of my words faded into the walls. Then slowly I raised my eyes from the front row. My gaze traveled across the middle tables, past the captains and the colonels and their wives, all the way to the back of the room. I found my parents. My father was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck were visible from across the ballroom. I held his gaze. And sometimes those who share your blood find their way back however late, but they are here. My father's grip on the table released. His hands dropped to his lap, his head lowered. My mother reached over without looking and placed her hand on top of his. Following the formal ceremony, the reception hall filled with applause, laughter, and the smooth rolling notes of a jazz quartet playing in the corner. I stood near the bar with Marcus accepting handshakes and congratulations from senior officers. I was mid-conversation when I noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. My father was walking across the reception hall. He was not heading toward me. He bypassed the bar entirely. He walked in a straight line through the crowd, his sport coat buttoned his shoulders, squared, heading directly for my husband. Marcus saw him coming. He set his glass of club soda down on the bar and turned to face him. My father stopped 3 feet away. He did not offer a handshake. He stood at attention, his posture rigid, his arms pressed to his sides in a poor but sincere imitation of a military bearing. "I owe you an apology, son." My father said, his voice thick with heavy regret, barely audible above the jazz music. "The man who walked her down that aisle should have been me." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He did not smile broadly. He did not embrace him. He simply nodded, offering a tight, respectful acknowledgement that carried more weight than any words could. My father exhaled. His shoulders dropped 2 inches. The patriarchy had officially publicly surrendered. My parents stayed in therapy. It was not a magical fix. There was no single session where everything clicked into place and decades of damage were erased by a breakthrough moment on a leather couch. It was slow, grinding, uncomfortable work. My mother finally confronted her own cowardice with the help of a therapist who did not let her hide behind tears and deflection. She sat in that office twice a week and dissected every moment she chose silence over her daughter. My father spent hours dismantling the toxic pride that nearly cost him his entire family. He learned words he had never used before: accountability, emotional labor. He wrote them down in a small notebook. The therapist gave him his handwriting, tight and angular, like a man learning a new language in his 60s. My sister survived her injuries, but she carried something that no amount of therapy would ever remove. A massive, jagged surgical scar stretched across her abdomen from the lower left rib cage down to the hip bone. Every single time she looked in the mirror, every time she changed her clothes, every time she reached for something on a high shelf, and the scar tissue pulled tight against her skin, she saw the surgical handiwork of the sister in uniform she had tried to erase. I did not need revenge. I never did. Becoming an elite major and chief of trauma surgery at one of the most demanding military hospitals in the country was the most brutal retaliation possible. My excellence was the loudest statement I ever made, and it was permanent. It was a Sunday morning in late February. Light snow was falling over the driveway of my new house, a 3-bedroom brick colonial I had purchased with Marcus just outside the base. The flakes were small and dry, barely sticking to the concrete. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, walked through the hallway, and opened the heavy oak front door. My parents were standing on the porch. My father was holding a glass bottle of orange juice in his right hand, his nose red from the cold, his leather gloves tucked into his coat pocket. My mother was clutching a tin of homemade cookies against her chest, the same chocolate chip recipe she used to make when I was in elementary school. They did not assume they could just walk in. They did not push past me the way my father used to push past every boundary in the house. They stood on the welcome mat, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air, respecting the perimeter I had set. My father shifted his weight from his left foot to his right. My mother pressed her lips together and blinked twice. I looked at them both for 3 full seconds. Then I stepped aside. "Come in," I said softly. My father stepped into the hallway. He bent down carefully and untied his snow boots, pulling each one off and placing them side by side on the rubber mat near the door. He stood up in his wool socks, looking around the house. He had never been inside before. His eyes moved slowly across the walls. He took in the framed photo of my military graduation, me shaking hands with General Hayes, while Marcus stood behind us clapping. He took in the wedding photo, Marcus and me standing beneath an arch of white flowers, his father's arm linked through mine. He took in the small framed photograph of Chloe that sat on the hallway console table, a candid shot of her laughing during a training exercise, her face bright and alive. He looked at each photo the way a man reads a report of everything he missed. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight awkwardly from foot to foot. He turned to me. The old patriarch, the man who once ran the household like a factory floor, who demanded obedience with a raised voice and a pointed finger, looked at me, not as a commander demanding loyalty, but like a private waiting for an order from his commanding officer. "Can I help with anything?" he asked. His voice was quiet, unsure, stripped of every weapon it once carried. I looked at this 62-year-old man standing in my hallway in his wool socks holding a bottle of orange juice, stripping his ego bare just to be useful to me. I nodded toward the kitchen counter. "You can set the table." He walked over with careful, measured steps. He opened the cabinet door slowly, as though afraid of making too much noise. He pulled out the heavy ceramic plates one at a time, gripping each one with both hands. He counted them silently. 4 plates. He carried them to the kitchen table and set them down on the wood with painstaking care, adjusting each plate with the tips of his fingers, making sure they were perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. He placed the napkins beside them. He set out the forks. He aligned the glasses. Every movement was deliberate, almost reverent, as though he was handling something fragile and sacred that he knew he did not deserve to touch. My mother stepped behind me while I poured the coffee. She wrapped her arms around my waist, pressing her palms flat against my stomach. She rested her forehead against my shoulder blade, right between the shoulder blades, the exact spot where Chloe's yellow sticky note had once been folded inside my breast pocket. She did not say anything. She just held on. It was not perfect. It was awkward and heavy and filled with the kind of silence that only exists between people who have hurt each other deeply enough to understand the weight of standing in the same room again. But it was real. The snow kept falling outside the kitchen window. Marcus came down the stairs, paused at the bottom step, and took in the scene without a word. He walked over, pulled out the 4th chair, and sat down. "I am Major Angela Morris. I earned my rank. I earned my name. I earned the right to stand in my own kitchen and decide who sits at my table. And slowly, under my own ironclad rules, under conditions I set and boundaries I enforce, I am allowing myself to be a daughter again. If you have survived family betrayal and built your own fortress of peace, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs the strength to enforce their own boundaries today. Until next time, stay strong.